Bonsoir classe. Ce soir, je voudrais vous parler des mots interrogatifs ou comment poser des questions sophistiquées en français. Tonight we're going to talk about question words and asking more sophisticated questions in French than we've done up to now. On emploie les mots suivants avec est-ce que ou une inversion pour poser des questions sophistiquées. Okay, we use the following words, the following question words to ask more sophisticated questions, and we use them either with est-ce que or an inversion. When you use one of these question words, you have to use est-ce que or an inversion to ask your question. You have no choice in the matter. Okay, so you can start your question with à quelle heure, at what time, but you're going to have est-ce que or an inversion after. So à quelle heure est-ce que tu joues au basket? Okay, what time are you going to play basketball? Combien de? How many or how much? Okay, of course we can just ask the question combien by itself to find out how much, but usually if you want to ask how many of something or how much of something, you're going to use combien de. So combien d'argent as-tu? There I used combien de to ask about how much money someone had, and I used the inversion as-tu after it. Comment? How or what? Où? Where? Pourquoi? Why? Quand? When? Okay. Que we can use by itself, or we can use with est-ce que right after it, and it becomes qu'est-ce que, which you guys have heard a lot in class already. Qu'est-ce que c'est, for example. Qu'est-ce qu'il pense, for example. Okay. All you're doing when you say qu'est-ce que is using que, what, and adding est-ce que after it. You can also ask your question using just que and an inversion. Que fait-il maintenant? What's he doing now? Okay. Quel, which changes, notice, with masculine or feminine nouns and also plural nouns. So you can make quel feminine or plural. Okay, it's going to change with the noun it describes, because quel is an adjectival form of question word. So quelle heure est-il? There's a question, the classic question, what time is it? What hour is it, literally? Quel stylo as-tu? Okay. Which pen do you have? And there I'm going to use the form of quel that doesn't have an extra L-E on the end, just Q-U-E-L. Quel. If I were going to ask about something plural, for example, quel crayon as-tu? Okay. And there I'm asking which pencils do you have. I'm going to have to add that S on there. I'm going to have Q-U-E-L-S. Okay, Q-U-E-L-S to ask that question. À, avec, or pour qui. Okay, we can use prepositions before qui, notice, such as à, avec, or pour, to ask to, with, or for whom. We don't really do this too much in English anymore. We tend to put the to, the with, or the for at the end of sentences now. And that's increasingly becoming accepted. It didn't used to be, but that's the case now. So we say, who are you talking to? In French, you have to say, to whom are you talking? So you have to start with that to. À qui parles-tu? Okay. And we can do the same thing with quoi. We can have à quoi, for example, à quoi penses-tu? De quoi, avec quoi. Okay. About or with what. So here are a couple of sample questions at the bottom that you've already heard before. Let's see if you can answer them. You can just practice these out loud orally. Comment t'appelles-tu? And comment est-ce que vous vous appelez? Comment t'appelles-tu? Comment est-ce que vous vous appelez? Notice that in the first instance we used an inversion. Comment t'appelles-tu? The subject came after the verb with a dash. In the second instance, we used comment, and then we used est-ce que after. Remember, those are always our two options with these question words. We can do an inversion, or we can use est-ce que. Les exemples et les traductions. Okay, here's some examples with translations. Où allez-vous? Where are you going? Again, we used où, a question word, and we did an inversion. Allez-vous? Pourquoi est-ce que tu danses? Here I used why, a question word, and I used est-ce que after it, and then my subject and verb. Tu danses. Combien de frères et sœurs as-tu? Okay, here's a question with using combien de, and then I use an inversion after frères et sœurs. How many brothers and sisters you have, and pour qui est-ce que vous travaillez? Here I used pour qui as my question word, and I used est-ce que after it. Okay. So just to recap, remember that when we use one of the question words that we've seen prior to this screen, we have to use either est-ce que, and then our subject, je, tu, il, elle, Jean-Paul, Pierre, or whoever it is, and then the verb. Or we use the question word and we follow it up with an inversion. That's when you, remember, that's when you flip-flop the subject and the verb. So instead of tu as, for you have, you're going to say as-tu. Remember that. Okay. On your separate sheet of paper that you have prepared for tonight's exercises and that you'll bring to class tomorrow, complete the translations at the bottom of the screen in the blue boxes. So how would you ask these questions in French? The questions are in the blue boxes at the bottom of the screen. Voici quelques exemples d'un langage très familier. Okay, here are some examples of very informal speech. Let's see if you can, if you notice anything, if you can tell me what they have in common. Tu t'appelles comment? Tu vas où? Elle dîne avec qui? Vous arrivez à quelle heure? Il mange quoi? Okay. Qu'est-ce que vous remarquez? What do you notice about these examples? Jot down on your sheet of paper what you've noticed about these examples. What do they all have in common in terms of placement of question words? Est-ce que vous pouvez poser des questions pour ces réponses? Okay. On the left, in the column on the left, are 4 answers. Je pense à lui. Okay, for example. What would the question be? How would you form the question on the right? Notice that you're going to need, there are 2 blanks there before penses-tu in the first example, and actually there are 2 blanks before each example all the way through the right column. So take note of that. What question words would you put in those blanks to complete the question? So the answer is je pense à lui. What's the question? Elle pense au film. What's the question on the right? Je parle du cours. What would the question be on the right? Nous parlons à Jeff. What would the question be on the right? Okay. I'll give you a hint. You need to use a preposition in each case, like à, de. Okay. And you'll have to figure out what the other 2, what the 2 options for question words are here that you could use on the right, in the right columns. Okay. Remember that all of these are followed by inversion or est-ce que. Notice on the right. Pourquoi? Okay, how do we answer pourquoi questions? Well, we've been doing this quite a bit already. We answer pourquoi questions usually using parce que. Because. Pourquoi habites-tu en banlieue? Parce que je n'aime pas le centre-ville. Okay. The first question asking why, and I use an inversion. Do you live in the suburbs? The answer is, we're going to answer using parce que, because je n'aime pas le centre-ville. Okay, how to say what in response to something you didn't hear or understand. This is a somewhat thorny issue for Americans at times. We're used to saying what, which isn't horribly polite in English, and in French it's really just not acceptable. We don't say, you can say that, you can say quoi, for example, but it's really not at all polite. So we're going to try to avoid it. So, for example, here's a question that someone asks you. Vous allez voyager cette année? If you want to ask, I beg your pardon, you're going to say comment? You're going to avoid saying quoi. Okay. Tu n'aimes pas ton cours d'histoire? Okay. You didn't hear well, you're going to say pardon. Okay. Like excuse me, for example. We're going to avoid saying quoi. Quoi is kind of like quoi? Quoi? Kind of, you can hear just how abrupt and how direct that is. It's a hair root. Quoi n'est pas poli? C'est ce qu'on vient de dire. Tu manges chez Philippe? Quoi? Okay, here's a good example of how quoi is used. It can be used to convey an answer that's really not very polite, or if you somebody really wants to provoke someone, for example. The question is, tu manges chez Philippe? And this person is answering, quoi? Tu es dingue? Je déteste Philippe. Okay, he's implying, why would you even ask me that question? It's crazy. Okay, so that's a good use for quoi. But we're not going to use quoi just to say, what? Huh? Excuse me, I didn't get it. Qui au début d'une question. Okay, qui, who, can stand alone at the beginning of a question, just like it does in English. There's really no difference between the way qui, who, is used in French and the way it's used in English when qui starts the sentence. It's always followed by a verb. So in the example we have here, the question is, qui fréquente le FECA? Remember, FECA is café en verlan. In our, remember, backwards language that we talked about the other day, café, FECA. Okay. Notice that we have qui at the beginning of the sentence, and we have a verb right after it, fréquente. Okay, and you're going to make that verb agree with qui. Qui is conjugated just like il ou elle. Okay. And we could answer that question talking about one person or more than one person, just like we can answer who the same way in English, talking about more than one person if we want. So we could say Jean-Yves et Nathalie fréquentent le café. Just make sure your verb agrees with whatever subject you use to answer the question. So remember, qui is followed by a verb, and we use it at the beginning of a sentence to ask who is doing something. Okay, here are the forms that I alluded to earlier of quel. Okay, if we're asking which something that's masculine and singular, we're going to say quel with one noun. Quel hôpital préfères-tu? If we're talking about which something that's feminine, we're going to use quel with two L's and an E on the end. Quelle place est la plus belle? If we're asking which something that's plural, okay, so like which restaurant, for example, we're going to use quel with an L and an S if our noun is masculine. Quel restaurant aimez-vous à New York? Okay. On the other hand, if our noun is feminine and we're asking which something feminine and plural, we're going to use quel with two L's, an E and an S on the end. So, quelle montagne y a-t-il en Californie? Okay, montagne is plural and feminine, so we're going to use quelle, Q-U-E, deux L, E-S. Q-U-E-L-L-E-S. Okay. Answer the questions at the bottom of the screen on your sheet of paper, please. Quel problème est-ce que tu as? Quels sont tes problèmes? Notice that those are two ways of asking the same question, so you can just respond once. Okay, here are a bunch of answers to questions. Posez les questions, s'il vous plaît. Okay, so I want you using the italicized words, except in the first instance where there is a kind of stock question that goes with that answer that we've used already several times earlier this year. In the other answers, there are words italicized. Use those words that are italicized to determine which question word you're going to ask. So let's take the second one, j'écris avec un stylo, as an example. The italicized words are avec and then a thing. So we're probably going to want to ask with what thing, or what thing are we writing with? How would you do that? Okay, and you can continue. Try to ask the questions that have these sentences as responses. In each case, you can write them on your separate sheet of paper there. All right, ça c'est la fin de la présentation. Thank you for listening tonight. Merci de votre écoute. And on va en parler en classe lundi. Okay, and we'll have a look at your answers at our next class. Bonne soirée. Au revoir.